They thought it was just an old, spooky house. They were wrong. The house had stood for centuries, its walls soaked with the memories of countless souls who had dared to enter. It was a place where the past and present intertwined, where the air was thick with the whispers of the long-forgotten. On the outskirts of a small town, an old, decaying house whispered of curses. The townsfolk spoke of it in hushed tones, warning their children to stay away. It was said that those who entered never came out the same. The house was a living entity, feeding off the fear and curiosity of those who dared to approach. One chilly autumn night, a group of teenagers, driven by curiosity, ventured inside. They had heard the stories, but they were young and fearless, eager to prove that the tales were nothing more than old wives' tales. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they stepped into the unknown. Their flashlights flickered against the peeling wallpaper and shattered furniture, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. The house seemed to breathe, its creaks and groans echoing through the empty rooms. Every step they took was met with the sound of their own hearts pounding in their chests. Laughter echoed as they dared each other deeper. They tried to mask their fear with jokes and bravado, but the house seemed to sense their unease. It was as if the very walls were watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the attic, they discovered a dusty, cracked mirror. It stood alone in the corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. The mirror seemed out of place, as if it had been waiting for them. Its surface was marred by cracks, but it still held a strange allure. Jake, jokingly, suggested they peer into it. He was the bravest of the group, always the first to take a dare. With a grin, he stepped forward, his reflection staring back at him from the cracked glass. One by one, their reflections stared back, until Jake's turn. As each teenager took their turn, the mirror seemed to come alive, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly light. But when Jake stepped up, something changed. He leaned in, and his smile faded. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread washed over him. He could feel the eyes of his friends on his back, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from the mirror. A shadowy figure stood silently behind him. It was barely visible at first, a dark shape that seemed to blend into the background. But as Jake stared, it became clearer, its hollow eyes boring into his soul. Startled, he turned. Nothing was there. His friends laughed, thinking it was just a trick of the light, but Jake knew better. He could still feel the presence of the figure lurking just out of sight. But then the air grew cold and the mirror shimmered. The temperature dropped suddenly and their breath came out in visible puffs. The mirror seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its surface rippling like water. An ominous voice whispered, "Leave, before it's too late." The voice was barely audible, a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It sent chills down their spines, and they knew they had to leave. Panic ensued, but Jake felt drawn to the mirror. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a strange connection to the mirror, as if it was calling to him. His friends tried to pull him away, but he resisted, his eyes locked on the shimmering surface. The shadow's hollow eyes stared, lips mouthing, "Help me." The figure seemed to be trapped within the mirror, its eyes filled with a desperate plea. Jake felt a surge of empathy, and he knew he had to help. A hand shot out, gripping his wrist. The touch was ice cold, and Jake felt a jolt of fear. He tried to pull away, but the grip was too strong. His friends screamed, their faces pale with terror. His friends screamed, pulling him away as the mirror shattered. The sound was deafening, and shards of glass flew through the air. They dragged Jake out of the attic, their hearts pounding with fear. Days later, whispers followed Jake. Shadows flickered and reflections haunted him. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched, that the shadowy figure was still with him. His friends noticed the change in him, but they didn't know how to help. Desperate, they returned to confront the spirit. They knew they had to face their fears, to put an end to the haunting once and for all. Armed with new resolve, they made their way back to the old house, but the mirror now held no reflection, only the shadowy figure stepping out. The figure seemed to grow more solid with each step, its hollow eyes fixed on them. They could feel its malevolent presence, and they knew they were in grave danger. "Thank you for bringing me back," it said as darkness consumed them. The voice was cold and hollow, filled with a sense of triumph. The darkness enveloped them, and they felt a crushing weight on their chests. The house stood silent once more, waiting for its next visitors. The air was thick with the sense of foreboding, and the house seemed to pulse with a dark energy. It was a place of nightmares, a place where the past and present collided in a never-ending cycle of fear and despair. The house was alive, and it was always hungry for more souls to consume. In the corner of the attic, a dusty old book lay forgotten. Its pages began to turn by themselves, revealing ancient symbols and incantations. The book seemed to hum with power, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. The teenagers huddled together, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. They knew that the book held the key to the house's dark secrets, but they were afraid of what they might find. The air was thick with tension as they debated whether to open it. With trembling hands, Jake reached for the book. His fingers brushed the cover, and he felt a jolt of energy. The book seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and he knew that once he opened it, there would be no turning back. The pages flipped rapidly, revealing glowing symbols that seemed to dance on the paper. The room was filled with a strange light, and the air crackled with energy. The teenagers watched in awe and fear, knowing that they had unleashed something powerful. The shadowy figure reacted to the book, its form becoming more solid. Dark energy swirled around it, and it seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. The teenagers could feel the weight of its presence, and they knew they had to act quickly. With determination, they began to chant an incantation from the book. Their voices grew stronger, and the air seemed to vibrate with power. The shadowy figure writhed in pain, its form flickering as the incantation took effect. A brilliant light enveloped the shadowy figure, and it began to dissolve into mist. The teenagers watched in awe as the figure disappeared, its presence finally banished from the house. They felt a sense of relief, knowing that they had broken the curse. They hugged each other, smiles of relief on their faces. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as well, its dark energy dissipating. They knew that they had faced their fears and emerged victorious. As they stepped outside, the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. The house stood silent, its dark secrets finally laid to rest. The teenagers knew that they would never forget this night, but they also knew that they had conquered their fears. They walked away from the house, their heads held high. They had faced the unknown and emerged stronger for it. The house would always be a part of their memories, but they knew that they had the strength to face whatever came next. The shattered mirror lay in pieces on the floor, its surface reflecting the morning light. It was a reminder of the darkness they had faced, but also of the light they had found within themselves. The house was no longer a place of fear, but a testament to their courage and resilience. The house stood peaceful and still, its dark energy finally dispelled. It was a place of history and mystery, but also of hope. The teenagers knew that they had made a difference, and that the house would never be the same again. They had faced the haunted mirror and emerged victorious, their spirits unbroken and their hearts filled with light.